Hello, and welcome to The Sleepy Why, your gentle refuge where we explore the mysteries that keep us wondering in the quiet hours. We're here to unravel the beautiful puzzles hiding in plain sight, and tonight we're diving into something that touches all of us, that nagging feeling that everything costs more than it should, and the fascinating ways money stress shapes our minds. If you find yourself looking forward to these curious conversations, subscribing would mean everything to us. And we're always wondering, what corner of the world are you tuning in from tonight? Drop a comment and let us know where you're listening. Tonight, we're going to explore why that grocery bill makes you do a double take, why your brain goes into overdrive when you're checking your bank balance, and how the very concept of money creates some of the most interesting neurological puzzles we've ever discovered. This isn't about budgeting tips or financial advice. It's about understanding the absolutely fascinating ways our minds process scarcity, abundance, and everything in between. Chapter 1. The Grocery Store. Time Machine. Picture this scenario. You're walking through the grocery store, and you reach for that same box of cereal you've been buying for years. But when you glance at the price tag, something feels off. Wasn't this $12 last month? Or was it 10? Or maybe it was always 15 and you just never noticed. Your brain starts doing this weird calculation dance, trying to figure out if you're remembering correctly or if prices really have jumped. We've all been in this situation, standing in an aisle with a growing sense that something fundamental has shifted in the world of money. But here's what's really fascinating. Your brain isn't just processing the price of cereal. It's actually running an incredibly complex system that's been evolving for millions of years, trying to solve problems that our ancestors never had to face. Your brain has this amazing ability called reference point processing. Think of it like having an internal price catalog that gets updated every time you buy something. But here's the weird part. This catalog isn't nearly as accurate as you might think. Your brain is constantly making these fascinating shortcuts. And when it comes to money, these shortcuts can create some absolutely mind-bending experiences. When you're standing there with that box of cereal, your brain is actually doing something called anchoring. It's grabbing onto the first price it remembers, maybe from 6 months ago, maybe from last week, and using that as the measuring stick for everything else. But anchoring isn't just about prices. It's about how your brain creates a sense of reality in a world where everything is constantly changing. Here's something that will blow your mind. Economists have discovered that people have what they call money illusion. This means our brains are terrible at adjusting for inflation over time. If you made $50,000 10 years ago and you make $55,000 today, your brain might think you're doing better financially, even though that $50,000 from a decade ago could buy more stuff than your current salary can. But wait, it gets even weirder. Your brain doesn't just process absolute prices. It processes relative prices. So when everything around you gets more expensive, your brain starts recalibrating what expensive even means. It's like your internal price catalog is constantly being rewritten, and you're not even aware it's happening. This is why that grocery store moment feels so disorienting. Your brain is essentially experiencing a glitch in its reality processing system. It's trying to match current information with stored memories, and when those don't align, you get this unsettling feeling that something is fundamentally wrong with the world. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating conversation happening between different regions. Your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles planning and decision-making, is trying to calculate whether you should buy the cereal or look for alternatives. But your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, is starting to send out little warning signals about spending money when everything feels uncertain. You might not have noticed, but your body language probably changes during these moments. Your shoulders might tense up slightly, your breathing might become a bit more shallow, and you might find yourself unconsciously doing mental math. These are all signs that your brain has activated what neuroscientists call the resource scarcity response, a system that's been keeping humans alive for thousands of years. What's absolutely fascinating is that this response doesn't just affect how you think about money, it actually changes how you think about everything. When your brain perceives that resources are scarce, it shifts into a different mode of operation entirely. It becomes more focused on immediate concerns and less able to think about long-term planning. It's like your brain is saying, we need to survive today before we can worry about tomorrow. This might explain why you feel that everything is more expensive, even when you're not entirely sure if it actually is. Your brain is designed to notice threats and changes in your environment, and rising costs trigger the same ancient alarm systems that once helped our ancestors survive famines and harsh winters. The grocery store has become a modern-day environment where these prehistoric survival mechanisms are working overtime. And here's a beautiful contradiction. The same brain that's amazing at detecting patterns and remembering faces is surprisingly bad at remembering exact prices. Studies have shown that people typically remember prices as being lower than they actually were, which means every shopping trip becomes a small shock to the system. Your brain is constantly being surprised by reality, and that surprise feels like the world is becoming more expensive around you. But that's just the beginning of this mystery. There's so much more happening in your mind when it comes to money and stress, and it's about to get even more fascinating. Chapter 2: The Invisible Weight of Financial Worry. You know that feeling when you're trying to fall asleep, but your mind starts wandering to your bank account. Maybe you're thinking about that upcoming bill, or wondering if you have enough saved for an emergency, or just generally feeling like you're not quite on solid financial ground. Your body is ready for sleep, but your brain seems to have other plans. What if I told you that financial stress doesn't just affect your mood? It actually rewires your brain in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. When we worry about money, our brains undergo changes that are so profound they can affect everything from our ability to concentrate to how we relate to other people. Here's something absolutely fascinating. Researchers have discovered that financial stress activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. When you're worried about money, your brain is literally experiencing a form of hurt. The anterior cingulate cortex, which processes emotional pain, lights up in brain scans when people think about financial problems. This means that saying money stress is painful isn't just a metaphor, it's a neurological fact. But your brain's response to financial stress goes way beyond just feeling bad. When you're worried about money, your brain starts operating in what scientists call tunneling mode. This is when your cognitive resources become so focused on the immediate problem that everything else becomes harder to process. It's like your brain is shining a spotlight on your financial concerns. But that spotlight is so bright that everything else gets plunged into darkness. Some people notice that when they're stressed about money, simple tasks become surprisingly difficult. You might find yourself standing in your kitchen, trying to remember what you came in there for, or reading the same paragraph in a book 3 times without absorbing any of it. This isn't because you're not smart enough. It's because your brain is using so much processing power to worry about money that there's less available for everything else. This tunneling effect explains why financial stress can make us feel so scattered and unfocused. Your brain is essentially running a background program that's constantly calculating and recalculating your financial situation, and this program is using up mental resources that you need for other things. It's like trying to run multiple demanding applications on a computer. Eventually, everything starts running slower. Meanwhile, in your brain, something even more interesting is happening. Chronic financial stress actually changes the structure of your brain over time. The hippocampus, which is crucial for memory formation, can actually shrink when exposed to prolonged stress. This might explain why people sometimes feel like they're in a fog when they're dealing with money problems. Their brain's memory systems are literally being affected by the stress. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Financial stress doesn't just affect your individual brain, it affects how your brain relates to other people. When we're worried about money, we become more likely to perceive others as threats rather than allies. Our brains start operating in a more defensive mode, or we're constantly scanning for signs that other people might be competition for limited resources. You might have noticed this in your own life. When you're feeling financially stressed, social situations can feel more draining. Small talk becomes harder, and you might find yourself feeling irritated by things that normally wouldn't bother you. This isn't because you're becoming a less pleasant person. It's because your brain is reallocating energy away from social processing and toward threat detection. This social effect of financial stress creates what researchers call cognitive load. When your brain is constantly processing financial worries, it has less capacity available for the complex social calculations that normally happen automatically. Things like reading facial expressions, understanding tone of voice, and picking up on social cues all become more difficult when your brain is preoccupied with money stress. Here's something that might surprise you. Financial stress can actually change how you perceive time. When people are worried about money, they tend to focus more on the immediate future and less on long-term planning. This isn't because they don't care about the future. It's because their brain's temporal processing system is being affected by stress. The present moment feels more urgent and demanding when you're worried about resources. This time perception shift has some really interesting effects. People under financial stress often report feeling like they don't have enough time, even when they objectively have the same 24 hours as everyone else. Their brains are processing time differently, making everything feel more rushed and immediate. It's like living in a constant state of temporal compression, where the future feels uncertain and the present feels overwhelming. But wait, there's another layer to this story. Financial stress doesn't just affect how we think, it affects how we feel about ourselves. When people are worried about money, they often experience what psychologists call financial shame. This is different from just feeling bad about spending too much or not saving enough. Financial shame is a deeper feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with you as a person because of your financial situation. This shame response activates some of the most primitive parts of our brain, the parts that are concerned with social survival and belonging. When we feel financial shame, our brains are essentially telling us that we might be rejected by our tribe because we're not contributing enough resources. It's an ancient fear that doesn't quite match our modern reality, but it feels incredibly real when you're experiencing it. The fascinating thing about financial shame is that it creates a feedback loop. When you feel ashamed about your financial situation, it becomes harder to think clearly about money, which can lead to more financial stress, which creates more shame. It's like your brain gets stuck in a loop where negative emotions about money make it harder to deal with money effectively. And that leads us to an even more intriguing discovery about how our brains handle the concept of money itself. Chapter 3. The Neuroscience of Currency. Have you ever stopped to think about how bizarre money actually is? We trade pieces of paper and numbers on screens for real things like food, shelter, and experiences. When you really think about it, money is one of the most successful shared hallucinations in human history. Everyone agrees that these symbols have value, and somehow that collective agreement makes them actually valuable. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. Your brain has had to evolve new neural pathways to process this completely artificial concept. Money doesn't exist in nature. No other species has anything quite like it. Your brain has had to create entirely new systems to understand and work with something that didn't exist for most of human history. Neuroscientists have discovered that when people think about money, their brains activate regions that are normally used for processing tools. This makes sense when you think about it. Money is essentially a tool that we use to get other things. But what's fascinating is that your brain processes money differently than it processes other tools. Money activates additional regions related to social cognition and future planning, because money is inherently about relationships and delayed gratification. When you see money, whether it's cash in your wallet or numbers on a screen, your brain is doing something incredible. It's converting abstract symbols into representations of potential futures. That $20 bill in your pocket isn't just paper to your brain. It's a compressed representation of possibilities. Your brain sees that money and automatically starts calculating what it could become. food, entertainment, security, or 1,000 other things. This is why money can feel so emotionally charged. Your brain isn't just processing a tool, it's processing compressed potential. Every financial decision becomes a choice between different possible futures, and your brain has to somehow weigh all these possibilities against each other. It's like your brain is constantly playing a complex game of what if with every dollar you encounter. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Your brain processes money differently depending on how you acquired it. Money that you worked for activates different neural pathways than money that you received as a gift or found unexpectedly. The effort and time you put into earning money literally changes how your brain values it. This is why people often feel differently about spending money they worked hard for versus spending money they received as a windfall. Some people notice that they're more careful with money that came from overtime hours or extra work, while they're more casual about spending money from a tax refund or a gift. This isn't just a psychological quirk. It's your brain applying different valuation systems to the same physical currency based on how it was acquired. Your brain also has this fascinating ability to create what economists call mental accounting. This is when your brain treats money differently based on arbitrary categories you've created. You might have a strict budget for groceries, but feel comfortable spending on entertainment, even though it's all the same money. Your brain is essentially running multiple financial tracking systems simultaneously, and these systems don't always communicate with each other. This mental accounting can create some really interesting contradictions. You might drive across town to save $5 on groceries, but then spend $15 on coffee without thinking twice. Your brain isn't being inconsistent. It's applying different rules to different categories of spending, and these rules are based on complex emotional and social calculations that happen mostly outside your conscious awareness. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this constant conversation happening between different regions about money. Your prefrontal cortex is trying to make rational decisions about spending and saving, but it's getting input from the limbic system, which is more concerned with immediate emotional responses. This is why financial decisions can feel so conflicted. Different parts of your brain are literally advocating for different choices. The limbic system, which includes structures like the amygdala and the nucleus accumbens, responds to money in ways that are similar to how it responds to food or sex. Money can trigger the same reward pathways that evolved to help us survive and reproduce. This is why spending money can feel good in the moment, even when you know rationally that you should save it. But here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. Your brain's response to money is heavily influenced by your cultural background and personal experiences. People from different cultures literally process money differently at the neurological level. Someone who grew up in a culture that emphasizes collective responsibility might have different neural responses to money than someone who grew up in a culture that emphasizes individual achievement. This cultural programming happens so early and so deeply that it becomes part of your unconscious processing. Your brain develops automatic responses to money based on what it learned about money's meaning during your formative years. These responses happen faster than conscious thought, which means your financial behavior is being influenced by neural patterns that were established long before you were old enough to understand what money actually was. Your brain also has this incredible ability to create emotional associations with money that persist long after the original experiences that created them. If you had experiences of financial insecurity as a child, your brain might maintain heightened vigilance around money even when you're financially stable as an adult. These associations are stored in deep brain structures that are very resistant to change through conscious reasoning alone. This might explain why people can have such strong emotional reactions to money that seem disproportionate to their actual financial situation. Your brain isn't just responding to your current financial reality. It's responding to a complex mixture of current circumstances, past experiences, and cultural programming that has been woven into your neural architecture over decades. But there's another layer to this story that's even more fascinating. Your brain doesn't just process money in isolation, it processes money in relationship to other people. Money is fundamentally a social technology. and your brain has had to develop specialized systems for understanding money in social contexts. And this social dimension of money creates some of the most interesting psychological phenomena we've ever discovered. Chapter 4. The Social Brain and Financial Comparison. You know that feeling when you're at dinner with friends, and everyone's looking at the check, and there's this moment of social calculation that happens? Not just the math of splitting the bill, but this complex social algorithm that your brain starts running about. Who ordered what? Who can afford what? And what the right thing to do is in this situation. Your brain is simultaneously processing numbers, social dynamics, and cultural expectations, all while trying to maintain relationships and manage your own financial boundaries. What if I told you that your brain has specialized circuits that are constantly comparing your financial situation to everyone around you? These aren't conscious comparisons. They're automatic processes that happen below the level of awareness, but they profoundly influence how you feel about your own financial situation. Here's something absolutely fascinating. Researchers have discovered that people's satisfaction with their income is more strongly correlated with how much they make relative to their peers than with their absolute income. This means that someone making $60,000 in a community where most people make $40,000 might feel more financially secure than someone making $80,000 in a community where most people make $100,000. Your brain is constantly running these social comparisons, and these comparisons shape your emotional experience of money more than the actual numbers in your bank account. This social comparison system is incredibly sophisticated. Your brain doesn't just compare your income to your neighbors, it compares your financial trajectory to theirs, your spending patterns to theirs, and even your financial stress levels to theirs. It's like having a background application running that's constantly benchmarking your financial life against everyone else's. Some people notice that they feel differently about their finances depending on who they're spending time with. You might feel perfectly content with your financial situation until you spend an evening with friends who are talking about expensive vacations or home renovations. Suddenly, the same bank account balance that felt adequate before now feels insufficient. Your brain has updated its reference point, and your emotional experience of your financial situation has shifted accordingly. This social comparison system evolved for good reasons. In small tribal communities, knowing where you stood relative to others was crucial for survival. If you were contributing your fair share to the group, you could expect support when you needed it. If you were taking more than you gave, you might find yourself ostracized. Your brain developed these comparison mechanisms to help you navigate complex social hierarchies and maintain your place in the group. But in our modern world, this ancient system is working overtime. Instead of comparing yourself to a small group of people you know well, your brain is trying to process comparisons with everyone you encounter, in person, on social media, in the news, and in entertainment. It's like your brain is trying to run tribal-level social calculations on a global scale, and the system is getting overwhelmed. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating interaction between regions that process social information and regions that process financial information. The temporoparietal junction, which is crucial for understanding other people's mental states, becomes more active when you're thinking about money in social contexts. Your brain is essentially trying to guess what other people are thinking and feeling about money, and using those guesses to inform your own financial decisions. This social processing of money creates what researchers call financial empathy. When you see someone struggling financially, your brain activates some of the same circuits that would be active if you were experiencing financial stress yourself. This is why watching someone else worry about money can be emotionally draining, even when your own finances are stable. Your brain is literally experiencing a diluted version of their stress. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain's social processing of money isn't just about empathy. It's also about status and competition. When you encounter signs that someone else is doing better financially than you are, your brain can activate competitive responses that are similar to those triggered by other forms of social competition. It's like your brain is treating financial success as a zero-sum game, where someone else's gain implies your loss. This competitive response can create some really complex emotions around money. You might find yourself feeling happy for a friend's financial success while simultaneously feeling threatened by it. These aren't contradictory feelings. They're your brain running multiple social calculations simultaneously. Part of your brain is genuinely pleased for your friend, while another part is updating its assessment of your relative social position. Your brain also has this amazing ability to create what psychologists call financial personas. These are the versions of yourself that you present to others in financial contexts. You might have a responsible spender persona that you use with your parents, a generous friend persona that you use with your social circle, and a shrewd negotiator persona that you use in professional settings. Your brain is constantly switching between these personas depending on the social context. These financial personas aren't just social masks. They actually influence how you think about money when you're in different social situations. When you're with friends who value experiences over possessions, your brain might process spending on travel differently than when you're with friends who prioritize saving for the future. It's like your brain has multiple financial personalities, and which one is active depends on who you're with. Here's something that might surprise you. Your brain processes financial generosity differently than other forms of generosity. When you give money to someone, your brain activates reward circuits that are similar to those activated by receiving money. But it also activates regions associated with social bonding and reputation management. Your brain is essentially calculating the social and emotional returns on your financial investment, even when you're being genuinely generous. This is why giving money can feel so complicated. Part of your brain is experiencing the genuine pleasure of helping someone, while another part is calculating how this generosity will affect your social standing and your relationship with the recipient. These calculations happen automatically, which means you can feel confused about your own motivations, even when you're trying to be purely altruistic. The social dimension of money also creates what researchers call financial contagion. This is when other people's financial behaviors and attitudes start to influence your own, often without you realizing it. If you spend time with people who are casual about money, your brain might start adopting more relaxed financial attitudes. If you spend time with people who are anxious about money, your brain might start becoming more financially vigilant, even if your own financial situation hasn't changed. This financial contagion happens because your brain is constantly learning from social cues about what's normal and appropriate in different contexts. It's like your brain is running a continuous survey of everyone around you, trying to figure out what the right way to think about money is in this particular social environment. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of money and the brain, how our perceptions of scarcity and abundance are shaped not just by our actual resources, but by our social environment and the stories we tell ourselves about the economic world around us. Chapter 5. The Scarcity Mindset and the Stories We Tell. Picture this. You're scrolling through your phone, and you see a news headline about rising costs, followed by a social media post from someone complaining about grocery prices, followed by an article about housing becoming unaffordable. By the time you put your phone down, you might notice that you feel a bit more anxious about money, even though your actual financial situation hasn't changed in the last 10 minutes. Your brain has just been exposed to a concentrated dose of scarcity messaging, and it's responding as if these abstract economic trends are immediate personal threats. What if I told you that your brain can't always distinguish between real scarcity and perceived scarcity? When you're constantly exposed to scarcity and perceived scarcity, your brain starts operating in scarcity mode even when you personally have enough resources. It's like your brain is designed to be influenced by the tribe's collective mood about resources. And in our hyper-connected world, the tribe includes everyone whose content you consume. Here's something absolutely mind-blowing. Researchers have discovered that exposure to scarcity messaging can actually change how your brain processes decisions for hours or even days afterward. When people read about economic hardship or watch news about financial struggles, Their brains become more focused on short-term gains and less able to engage in long-term planning. It's like scarcity messaging creates a temporary cognitive shift that prioritizes. This scarcity mindset isn't just about money. It's about how your brain processes all kinds of resources. When your brain is in scarcity mode, it becomes more likely to hoard not just money, but time, energy, and attention. You might find yourself feeling like you don't have enough time to do things you enjoy, even when you objectively have the same amount of time as always. Your brain is applying scarcity logic to everything, not just your finances. Some people notice that when they're worried about money, they also become more possessive about other things. You might find yourself reluctant to lend books, share tools, or even give away clothes you don't wear. This isn't because you're becoming selfish. It's because your brain is operating in a mode where all resources feel precious and potentially scarce. Your brain is essentially treating everything as if it might be needed for survival later. This scarcity mindset creates what psychologists call tunneling, the same phenomenon we discussed earlier, but applied more broadly. When your brain is focused on scarcity, it becomes harder to see opportunities, harder to think creatively, and harder to imagine positive future scenarios. It's like your brain's range of vision becomes narrower, focused intensely on immediate threats and short-term solutions. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Your brain's response to scarcity isn't just about your current situation. It's heavily influenced by the stories you tell yourself about what's happening in the economy and society around you. These stories become part of your brain's operating system, influencing how you interpret every piece of financial information you encounter. Your brain is constantly creating narratives to make sense of complex economic information. Maybe you have a story about how things used to be more affordable, or young people today have it harder than previous generations, or the economy is rigged against regular people. These stories aren't just opinions. They become lenses through which your brain processes all financial information. What's absolutely incredible is that different people can look at the same economic data and come to completely different conclusions about their financial reality depending on the stories their brains are using to interpret that data. Your brain is essentially running an economic worldview that filters and shapes every piece of financial information you encounter. These stories are so powerful that they can actually influence your brain's stress response. If you have a story that the economy is fundamentally unstable, your brain might maintain a higher level of financial vigilance even when your personal finances are stable. If you have a story that hard work always leads to financial success, your brain might interpret financial struggles as personal failures rather than systemic issues. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this constant process of story updating happening. Every time you encounter new information about money or the economy, your brain tries to fit it into your existing narratives. But sometimes the new information doesn't fit, and your brain has to either update the story or dismiss the information. This process happens mostly below conscious awareness, but it profoundly influences how you feel about your financial situation. Here's something that might surprise you. Your brain's financial stories are heavily influenced by what researchers call availability bias. This means that your brain gives more weight to information that's easy to remember or that you've encountered recently. If you've been reading a lot about inflation, your brain might overestimate how much prices have actually increased. If you've been hearing success stories, your brain might become more optimistic about financial opportunities. This availability bias is why media consumption can have such a powerful effect on financial anxiety. If you're constantly consuming content about economic problems, your brain starts to believe that these problems are more common and more severe than they actually are. It's like your brain is using the media as a sample of reality, but the sample is heavily biased toward dramatic and negative stories. Your brain also has this fascinating tendency to create what psychologists call confirmation bias around your financial stories. Once you have a narrative about how money works in the world, your brain becomes more likely to notice information that supports that narrative and less likely to notice information that contradicts it. It's like your brain is constantly looking for evidence that its story is correct, even when there's contradictory evidence available. This confirmation bias can create feedback loops where your financial stories become self-reinforcing. If you believe that money is hard to come by, your brain might focus on all the ways that money is difficult to earn while overlooking opportunities that are actually available. If you believe that financial success is mostly about luck, your brain might not invest as much energy in developing skills that could actually improve your financial situation. But here's a beautiful contradiction. The same brain that can get stuck in limiting financial stories also has an incredible capacity for updating and revising those stories. When people have experiences that strongly contradict their existing financial narratives, their brains can undergo what researchers call narrative revision. This is when your brain essentially rewrites its story about how money works based on new evidence. This narrative revision process is why financial breakthroughs can feel so transformative. It's not just that your financial situation has changed, it's that your brain has updated its fundamental story about what's possible for you financially. Your brain has literally rewired its approach to processing financial information, and this rewiring affects everything from your stress levels to your decision-making process. The fascinating thing about financial stories is that they're not just individual, they're cultural. Your brain is constantly picking up on collective narratives about money, success, and economic reality. These cultural stories become part of your personal financial worldview, often without you realizing it. Your brain is essentially running a mixture of personal financial stories and cultural financial stories, and these stories interact in complex ways. And this brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of money and the mind: how our brains have adapted to navigate economic uncertainty, and why that adaptation sometimes makes us feel like we're living in a world that's fundamentally more expensive and more financially threatening than it actually is. Chapter 6. The Uncertainty Engine in Your Head. You know that feeling when you're trying to make a financial decision, and you find yourself going in circles, imagining different scenarios, calculating and recalculating, but never feeling like you have enough information to make the right choice. You might be trying to decide whether to make a major purchase, or thinking about changing jobs, or just wondering if you should eat out tonight or cook at home. Your brain seems to be generating endless what-if scenarios, and none of them feel quite satisfying. What if I told you that your brain has a specialized system for dealing with uncertainty, and this system goes into overdrive when it comes to financial decisions? Your brain is essentially running a constant simulation engine, trying to predict different possible futures based on the financial choices you make. But in our modern economy, this uncertainty engine is working harder than it ever has before, and that extra work is creating some fascinating psychological effects. Here's something absolutely incredible. Your brain processes financial uncertainty differently than other types of uncertainty. When you're uncertain about something like the weather or what movie to watch, your brain can usually tolerate not knowing for a while. But when you're uncertain about money, your brain treats it as a potential threat that needs to be resolved quickly. This is because, for most of human history, uncertainty about resources was directly related to survival. Your brain has this amazing ability to create what researchers call uncertainty maps. These are mental models of all the things you don't know about your financial situation and how those unknowns might affect you. Your brain is constantly updating these maps based on new information, but it's also constantly generating new questions and concerns to add to the map. It's like your brain is running a background process that's always looking for new things to worry about. Some people notice that financial uncertainty feels different at different times of day. You might feel more anxious about money late at night, or first thing in the morning, or during certain seasons. This isn't random. Your brain's uncertainty processing system is influenced by everything from your circadian rhythms to your stress hormones. When your brain is already processing other forms of stress, financial uncertainty can feel more overwhelming. This uncertainty processing system is incredibly energy intensive. When your brain is working hard to manage financial uncertainty, it has less energy available for other cognitive tasks. This might explain why financial stress can make you feel mentally exhausted, even when you haven't been doing anything particularly challenging. Your brain has been working overtime to process all the unknowns in your financial situation. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating interaction between regions that process uncertainty and regions that process reward. Your brain is essentially trying to calculate not just what might happen, but how good or bad each possible outcome might feel. This creates what researchers call affective forecasting, your brain's attempt to predict how future financial situations will make you feel. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain is surprisingly bad at affective forecasting when it comes to money. People consistently overestimate how much positive financial changes will improve their mood, and they underestimate how quickly they'll adapt to negative financial changes. Your brain is essentially running predictions about your future emotional state, but these predictions are systematically biased in ways that can increase financial anxiety. This forecasting bias might explain why financial goals can feel so emotionally charged. Your brain is convinced that reaching a certain income level or savings target will make you feel significantly better. But research shows that people typically adapt to financial improvements much more quickly than they expect. Your brain is essentially chasing emotional outcomes that are less satisfying than it predicts they'll be. Your brain also has this incredible tendency to create what psychologists call planning fallacy around financial decisions. This is when your brain underestimates how long financial changes will take and overestimates how much control you have over financial outcomes. Your brain might create a mental timeline where you'll pay off debt in 6 months, when realistically it might take 12 or 18 months. This isn't because your brain is bad at math. It's because your brain is optimistically biased when it comes to predicting your own future behavior. The uncertainty engine in your brain is also heavily influenced by what researchers call ambiguity aversion. This is your brain's preference for known risks over unknown risks. When faced with financial uncertainty, your brain often prefers situations where the risks are clear and quantifiable, even if those risks are actually higher than the risks in uncertain situations. This is why people sometimes stick with financial situations they know are suboptimal rather than taking chances on opportunities that might be much better, but feel more uncertain. Here's something that will blow your mind. Your brain's response to financial uncertainty is influenced by your attachment style, the basic patterns of how you relate to other people that were formed in early childhood. People with different attachment styles literally process financial uncertainty differently. Some people's brains become more vigilant and controlling when faced with financial uncertainty, while others' brains become more likely to avoid financial decisions altogether. This attachment influence on financial uncertainty processing helps explain why people can have such different reactions to the same financial situations. Your brain isn't just processing the objective financial information. It's processing that information through the lens of your fundamental assumptions about security, control, and relationships. These assumptions were formed long before you understood what money was, but they continue to influence how your brain handles financial uncertainty throughout your life. Your brain also has this fascinating ability to create what researchers call uncertainty spirals. This is when uncertainty about one aspect of your financial situation leads to increased uncertainty about other aspects. You might start by worrying about whether you can afford a vacation, but then your brain starts questioning whether you're saving enough for retirement, whether your job is secure, and whether you're making good financial decisions in general. One small uncertainty triggers a cascade of other uncertainties, and suddenly your brain is processing far more financial stress than the original situation warranted. These uncertainty spirals happen because your brain's financial processing system is highly interconnected. When one area of financial uncertainty becomes active, it can trigger activation in related areas. It's like your brain has a financial worry network, and activating one node in the network can light up the entire system. This is why a single unexpected expense can sometimes trigger hours or days of broader financial anxiety. But here's a beautiful contradiction. The same brain that creates uncertainty spirals also has incredible resilience mechanisms. When people actually experience financial challenges, their brains often adapt much more successfully than they predicted they would. Your brain is essentially much better at handling actual financial problems than it is at handling the anticipation of financial problems. The uncertainty engine that creates so much stress is often much more distressing than the actual events it's trying to prepare for. This resilience mechanism helps explain why people often report that their worst financial periods weren't as emotionally devastating as they feared they would be. Your brain has backup systems for handling financial stress that only become active when you're actually facing real challenges. It's like your brain has been running disaster simulations that are more stressful than the actual disasters would be. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating discoveries about money and the brain: how our financial perceptions are shaped not just by what's happening in our personal lives, but by the constant stream of economic information that our brains are trying to process from the world around us. Quote, Chapter 7. The Information Overload. Economy. Picture this scenario. You wake up and check your phone, and within the first 5 minutes of your day, you've seen a news headline about inflation, an ad for a sale that ends today, a social media post about someone's expensive vacation, and a notification about your credit card balance. Before you've even gotten out of bed, your brain has processed more financial information than our ancestors might have encountered in weeks or months. And this is just the beginning of what your brain will have to handle. What if I told you that your brain wasn't designed to process the sheer volume of financial information that it encounters in a typical day? Your brain evolved to make financial decisions in small communities with limited resources and simple trade relationships. Now it's trying to navigate a global economy with thousands of financial products, constant market fluctuations, and an endless stream of advice, advertising, and economic commentary. It's like your brain is trying to run tribal-level decision-making software on a global-scale operating system. Here's something absolutely mind-blowing. Researchers have discovered that exposure to too much financial information can actually make people worse at making financial decisions. This isn't because the information is bad. It's because your brain has limited processing capacity, and when that capacity is overwhelmed with financial data, your brain starts making shortcuts that can lead to poor choices. It's like your brain is trying to drink from a fire hose of financial information, and most of it is just washing over you without being properly processed. Your brain has this amazing but problematic tendency to treat all financial information as if it's personally relevant, even when it's not. When you see news about the stock market, your brain might start worrying about your retirement savings, even if you're 25 years old, and your retirement is mostly in target date funds that you don't need to actively manage. When you see headlines about housing prices, your brain might start stress calculating your own housing situation, even if you're not planning to move for years. This constant activation of financial processing circuits is exhausting for your brain. It's like having an app running in the background on your phone that's constantly checking for updates. It drains the battery even when you're not actively using it. Your brain is continuously processing financial information that doesn't require any action from you, but the processing still uses mental energy that could be used for other things. Some people notice that they feel more financially anxious during periods when they're consuming more news or social media, even when their personal financial situation hasn't changed. This isn't coincidence. It's your brain responding to the increased volume of financial information by maintaining higher levels of financial vigilance. Your brain is essentially treating media consumption as if it's reconnaissance for potential financial threats. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating conflict happening between different information processing systems. Your prefrontal cortex is trying to evaluate financial information rationally, but your amygdala is responding emotionally to anything that seems like it might be financially threatening. This creates what researchers call information processing conflict. Different parts of your brain are literally disagreeing about how to respond to the same information. This conflict is amplified by the way financial information is typically presented in media. News stories tend to emphasize dramatic changes and potential problems because these capture attention better than gradual improvements or stable situations. Your brain is getting a steady diet of financial information that's biased toward crisis and change, which can make the economic world seem more unstable and threatening than it actually is. Your brain also has this incredible ability to create what psychologists call pseudo-relevance around financial information. This is when your brain convinces itself that financial information that doesn't directly affect you is actually personally important. You might find yourself closely following news about industries you don't work in, or worrying about economic trends that won't affect your life for years or decades. Your brain is essentially expanding its definition of relevant financial information to include almost everything. This pseudo-relevance effect is strengthened by the way your brain processes probability and risk. When you're exposed to information about financial problems, even problems that affect other people or other regions, your brain starts updating its assessments of how likely these problems are to affect you. It's like your brain is using other people's financial troubles as data points for calculating your own financial risk, even when the situations aren't comparable. Here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. Your brain's financial information processing system is heavily influenced by what researchers call emotional contagion. When you're exposed to financial stress in media, whether it's news about economic problems or social media posts about money worries, your brain can actually start experiencing diluted versions of that stress. It's like your brain is empathetically responding to financial emotions that aren't even your own. This emotional contagion effect helps explain why financial anxiety can feel so pervasive during periods of economic uncertainty. Your brain isn't just processing your own financial situation, it's processing the collective financial anxiety of everyone whose content you consume. It's like your brain is trying to maintain emotional awareness of the financial state of your entire digital community. And that's an impossible task that creates chronic stress. Your brain also has this fascinating tendency to create what researchers call comparison cascades when processing financial information. This is when exposure to information about other people's financial situations triggers automatic comparisons that can spiral into broader financial anxiety. You might see a post about someone's home renovation, which makes you think about your own housing situation, which makes you wonder if you're saving enough, which makes you question your entire financial strategy. These comparison cascades happen because your brain is constantly trying to calibrate your financial situation relative to others. But in our hyper-connected world, your brain is trying to compare your financial situation to a virtually unlimited number of people, many of whom are presenting curated versions of their financial lives. It's like your brain is trying to run social comparison calculations on a dataset that's both enormous and highly biased. The fascinating thing about financial information overload is that it affects different people differently depending on their underlying financial processing patterns. Some people's brains respond to information overload by becoming more anxious and vigilant, while others respond by shutting down and avoiding financial information altogether. Some brains try to process everything, while others start filtering out most financial information as irrelevant noise. But regardless of how your brain responds to information overload, the sheer volume of financial information in our environment is creating unprecedented challenges for human financial decision-making. Your brain is essentially trying to navigate a financial information environment that's completely different from anything humans have ever experienced before. And this brings us to one of the most practical aspects of understanding money and the brain: how awareness of these processes can change your relationship with financial stress, not through willpower or better budgeting, but through a deeper understanding of what's actually happening in your mind when you encounter money-related information. Chapter 8. The Liberation of Understanding. You know that moment when you're lying in bed and your mind starts wandering to that financial worry that's been nagging at you. Maybe it's wondering if you're saving enough, or whether you made the right choice about that recent purchase, or just a general sense that you're not quite on top of your financial life. But then, instead of spiraling into worry, you pause and think, Oh, this is my brain doing that thing where it processes financial uncertainty as a survival threat. This anxiety I'm feeling isn't necessarily proportional to any actual financial danger. It's my ancient alarm system responding to modern complexity. What if I told you that simply understanding what your brain is doing with money can change your entire emotional relationship with financial stress? Not through willpower or forcing yourself to think differently, but through the natural shift that happens when you recognize psychological processes for what they are. It's like the difference between being lost in a confusing house and suddenly realizing you're in a funhouse with mirrors and optical illusions. The house doesn't change, but your experience of being in it transforms completely. Here's something absolutely fascinating. Researchers have discovered that people who understand the psychological mechanisms behind financial stress actually experience less financial anxiety, even when their objective financial situation doesn't change. This isn't because they're suppressing their concerns or talking themselves out of legitimate worries. It's because their brains are processing financial information differently when they understand the mental processes involved. When you know that your brain treats financial uncertainty as a potential survival threat, you can start to recognize when your stress response is proportional to the actual situation and when it's an overreaction based on ancient programming. It's like having a better user manual for your own mind. You start to notice when your brain is running scarcity calculations that don't match your current reality, or when you're experiencing financial anxiety that's actually about something else entirely. Some people notice that once they understand how social comparison affects financial satisfaction, they become more aware of when their financial mood is being influenced by other people's situations rather than their own circumstances. You might catch yourself feeling financially inadequate after scrolling through social media, and instead of accepting that feeling as accurate information about your financial situation, you recognize it as your brain running automatic comparison calculations that don't serve you. This awareness doesn't make the feelings disappear immediately, but it changes your relationship with them. Instead of thinking, "I'm not doing well financially," you might think, "My brain is comparing my financial situation to curated highlights from other people's lives, and that comparison is making me feel artificially inadequate." It's the same feeling, but now you understand what's generating it, and that understanding creates space between you and the emotional response. Meanwhile, in your brain, something really interesting happens when you understand these processes. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that handles conscious reasoning, starts to have more influence over the limbic system's automatic stress responses. It's not that you're overriding your emotional responses, but rather that you're giving your rational brain more information to work with when it's trying to make sense of your emotional responses. This integration between rational understanding and emotional awareness can create what researchers call psychological flexibility around money. Instead of having rigid responses to financial situations, your brain becomes more able to adapt its responses based on the actual context. You might still feel stressed about money sometimes, but that stress becomes more informative and less overwhelming. Here's something that might surprise you. Understanding the psychology of money can actually change how you experience abundance and scarcity. When you recognize that scarcity mindset is often more about your brain's information processing than about your actual resources, you can start to notice when you have enough, but your brain is still operating in scarcity mode. It's like discovering that you've been running survival software when you could have been running abundance software. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to feel abundant when you're genuinely struggling financially. Instead, it means recognizing when your brain is creating artificial scarcity through comparison, catastrophic thinking, or information overload. You start to distinguish between real financial concerns that deserve your attention and psychological patterns that create unnecessary stress. Your brain also becomes more skilled at what researchers call emotional granularity around money. Instead of just feeling stressed about money, you might start to recognize more specific emotional patterns. "I'm feeling anxious because I'm comparing my situation to my friends," or I'm feeling overwhelmed because I've been consuming too much economic news, or I'm feeling insecure because I'm not sure how to plan for the future. This emotional granularity makes your feelings more useful as information. When you understand how your brain processes financial information, you also become more aware of your own financial stories and assumptions. You might start to notice when you're operating from beliefs like, money is always scarce, or financial success requires constant vigilance, or other people are naturally better with money than I am. These stories don't disappear overnight, but awareness of them creates the possibility of updating them based on new experiences and information. The fascinating thing about this kind of understanding is that it's naturally self-reinforcing. The more you understand about how your brain works with money, the more you notice these patterns in action, which deepens your understanding, which gives you more psychological flexibility, which reduces financial stress, which creates space for even more awareness. It's like a positive feedback loop that builds on itself over time. Here's something beautiful. This understanding doesn't require you to become an expert in neuroscience or psychology. Your brain is incredibly good at pattern recognition, and once you know what to look for, you start noticing these patterns naturally. You don't have to memorize which brain regions do what. You just have to be curious about your own mental processes and what might be driving them. You might also start to notice that financial stress often carries information about things that aren't directly related to money. Sometimes worry about expenses is actually anxiety about control or security. Sometimes frustration with your income is actually about feeling undervalued or uncertain about your future. Sometimes obsessing about financial decisions is actually your brain's way of trying to process other forms of uncertainty in your life. This doesn't mean that financial concerns aren't real or important. It means that understanding the full context of what your brain is processing when it comes to money can help you respond more effectively to both the financial and non-financial aspects of your concerns. It's like having a more complete picture of what's actually going on, which naturally leads to more targeted and effective responses. And perhaps most importantly, understanding these processes can help you develop more compassion for yourself when you're struggling with money-related stress. Instead of judging yourself for feeling anxious about finances, you can recognize that your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do, trying to keep you safe in a complex and uncertain environment. The anxiety isn't a character flaw. It's your brain working hard to protect you, even when that protection isn't necessary. The Hijacks, Chapter 9, The Hidden Emotional Lives of Numbers. You know that feeling when you check your bank balance, and there's this split second before the numbers register where your body seems to be bracing itself. Your shoulders might tense slightly, your breathing might pause, and there's this moment of emotional preparation before your brain even processes what the numbers mean. It's like your body knows that numbers on a screen are about to trigger an emotional response, even before you know what that response will be. What if I told you that your brain doesn't just process financial numbers as mathematical information? It processes them as emotional experiences. Every number you encounter in a financial context carries emotional weight that goes far beyond its mathematical value. Your brain has created incredibly sophisticated systems for converting abstract numerical information into feelings, and these feelings often influence your financial decisions more than the numbers themselves. Here's something absolutely mind-blowing. Researchers have discovered that people have emotional relationships with specific numbers that can persist for years or even decades. You might have a savings account balance that feels safe, even though that number is completely arbitrary. You might have an income level that feels successful, even though it's based more on social conditioning than on your actual needs or wants. Your brain has essentially assigned emotional meanings to numbers, and these emotional assignments become part of your financial reality. This emotional processing of numbers starts happening the moment you encounter financial information. Before your prefrontal cortex has finished calculating what a number means for your budget or your plans, your limbic system has already started generating emotional responses based on how that number feels. It's like your brain has two parallel processing systems for financial information, one that does math and one that does feelings, and the feelings often finish processing first. Some people notice that certain financial numbers can trigger emotional responses that seem disproportionate to the actual significance of those numbers. You might feel irrationally anxious when your checking account balance drops below a certain round number, even when you know you have plenty of money in savings. Your brain has created emotional significance around that number that goes beyond its practical importance. This emotional significance isn't random. It's based on a complex mixture of personal history, cultural conditioning, and psychological associations that your brain has built up over time. That safe number in your savings account might be connected to a time when you felt financially insecure, or to a story someone told you about how much money you should always have available, or to a completely arbitrary calculation that you did years ago and never updated. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating process happening where numbers get connected to emotions through what researchers call somatic markers. These are physical sensations that your brain associates with different financial situations. When you see a number that your brain has marked as dangerous, you might feel a subtle tightness in your chest or stomach, even before you consciously think about what that number means. These somatic markers are incredibly powerful because they operate faster than conscious thought. Your brain is essentially running an emotional early warning system that responds to financial numbers based on previous experiences and associations. This system can be helpful when it's accurately identifying real financial problems, but it can also create stress when it's responding to numbers that aren't actually threatening. Your brain also has this amazing ability to create what psychologists call numerical anchors around money. These are reference points that your brain uses to judge whether other numbers are good or bad. If you're used to spending $50 on groceries each week, your brain might use that as an anchor for judging whether grocery prices are reasonable. If you suddenly need to spend $75 for the same amount of food, your brain processes that as expensive, even if $75 is still well within your budget. These numerical anchors can create some really interesting psychological effects. Your brain might feel differently about spending $100 on something when your anchor is $50 versus when your anchor is $200. It's the same amount of money, but your brain processes it differently based on the reference point it's using for comparison. This is why lifestyle inflation can happen so gradually. Your brain keeps updating its anchors based on your recent spending patterns. Here's something that will blow your mind. Your brain can have completely different emotional responses to the same number, depending on the context in which you encounter it. $500 might feel like a lot of money when you're thinking about spending it on something optional, but it might feel like a small amount when you're thinking about your emergency fund. Your brain is essentially running contextual emotional calculations that change the meaning of numbers based on the situation. This contextual processing helps explain why people can have such complex relationships with money. Your brain might simultaneously believe that you have enough money and not enough money, depending on which context it's using to evaluate your financial situation. It's not that your brain is being inconsistent, it's that it's running multiple evaluation systems simultaneously, and these systems can reach different conclusions. Your brain also has this incredible tendency to create what researchers call mental accounting around numbers. This is when your brain treats the same money differently based on arbitrary categories you've created. You might feel comfortable spending $20 from your entertainment budget, but uncomfortable spending $20 from your grocery budget, even though it's the same money. Your brain has created emotional distinctions between numbers that are mathematically identical. This mental accounting can create some fascinating contradictions in financial behavior. You might feel guilty about spending $15 on coffee during a workday, but feel perfectly comfortable spending $50 on coffee during a vacation. Your brain is applying different emotional rules to the same type of spending based on the mental category it's using to process the expense. The emotional lives of numbers are also heavily influenced by what researchers call loss aversion. Your brain tends to feel losses more intensely than it feels equivalent gains. This means that losing $50 feels worse than gaining $50 feels good, even though the numbers are mathematically equal. Your brain is essentially running an asymmetrical emotional system where negative financial events have more psychological impact than positive ones. This loss aversion helps explain why financial setbacks can feel so emotionally devastating, even when they don't significantly impact your overall financial situation. Your brain is wired to pay more attention to money going out than to money coming in, which means that financial stress often feels more intense than financial satisfaction. It's like your brain has a built-in negativity bias when it comes to processing financial changes. Here's something beautiful. Understanding the emotional lives of numbers can help you recognize when your feelings about money are being driven by numerical associations rather than actual financial realities. You might start to notice when you're feeling anxious about a number that's actually fine, or when you're avoiding looking at financial information because your brain has created negative emotional associations with certain types of numbers. This awareness doesn't mean you should ignore your emotional responses to financial numbers. Instead, it means you can use those emotional responses as information while also considering the mathematical realities of your situation. Your feelings about numbers often contain valuable information about your financial priorities and concerns, but they're not always accurate indicators of your actual financial security or success. And this emotional understanding of numbers leads us to one of the most profound aspects of money and psychology: how our financial behaviors are often driven not by rational calculations, but by deep emotional needs that money represents in our lives. Chapter 10. What money really means to your brain. Picture this moment. You're holding a $20 bill in your hand, and for just a second, try to imagine that you've never encountered money before. You're looking at a piece of paper with intricate designs and numbers on it, and somehow, this piece of paper can be traded for food, or shelter, or experiences, or almost anything else you might want. When you really think about it, money is one of the most abstract concepts that your brain has learned to treat as completely real and tangible. What if I told you that your brain doesn't just process money as a tool for buying things? It processes money as a symbol for some of your deepest psychological needs. Every time you think about money, your brain is also thinking about security, control, freedom, status, love, and a dozen other fundamental human concerns. Money isn't just currency to your brain. It's a compressed representation of almost everything that matters to you as a human being. Here's something absolutely fascinating. Researchers have discovered that when people think about money, their brains activate regions associated with survival, social connection, personal identity, and future planning all at the same time. Money isn't processed in one part of your brain. It's processed as a complex network of associations that touches almost every aspect of human psychology. It's like money is the Swiss Army knife of psychological concepts, representing different things depending on what your brain needs in any given moment. This multi-layered processing helps explain why money can feel so emotionally complicated. When you're worried about money, you're not just worried about having enough numbers in your bank account. You might be worried about your safety, your independence, your relationships, your identity, your future, or your sense of control over your life. Your brain is processing all of these concerns simultaneously, which is why financial stress can feel so overwhelming and all-encompassing. Some people notice that their feelings about money change dramatically depending on what's happening in other areas of their lives. When you feel uncertain about your relationships or your career, you might find yourself more anxious about money, even when your financial situation hasn't changed. This is because your brain is using money as a proxy for processing other forms of security and stability. Financial anxiety often carries emotional weight that isn't really about money at all. Your brain has this incredible ability to create what psychologists call symbolic equivalences around money. This is when your brain treats money as if it's equal to other things that it represents. For some people, money equals safety, so not having enough money feels like being in physical danger. For others, money equals freedom, so financial constraints feel like imprisonment. For others, money equals love or approval, so financial success feels like being worthy of care and attention. These symbolic equivalences are usually formed early in life based on the messages your brain received about what money means in your family and culture. If you grew up in a household where money was associated with security and comfort, your brain might have learned to equate financial stability with emotional safety. If you grew up in a household where money was associated with conflict and stress, your brain might have learned to treat financial discussions as potential threats to your relationships. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating process happening where money activates what researchers call meaning-making networks. These are the same neural systems that help you understand your place in the world, your relationships with other people, and your sense of personal identity. When you think about money, your brain isn't just calculating numbers. It's trying to understand what those numbers mean for your life story and your sense of who you are. This meaning-making process helps explain why people can have such strong emotional reactions to financial situations that seem objectively manageable. Your brain isn't just processing the practical implications of your financial situation. It's processing what that situation means for your fundamental sense of security, autonomy, and belonging in the world. Financial challenges can feel like identity crises because, to your brain, they often are. Your brain also has this amazing tendency to create what researchers call financial narratives that go far beyond the practical aspects of money management. These are the stories your brain tells about what your financial situation means about you as a person, about your future prospects, and about your place in society. These narratives can be empowering or limiting, but they're always deeply personal and emotionally significant. For some people, having money in savings tells a story about being responsible and prepared. For others, it tells a story about being anxious and overly cautious. For some people, spending money on experiences tells a story about living life fully. For others, it tells a story about being frivolous and short-sighted. The same financial behaviors can have completely different psychological meanings depending on the narratives your brain has created around money. Here's something that will absolutely blow your mind. Your brain's relationship with money is heavily influenced by what researchers call attachment styles, the basic patterns of how you learn to connect with other people in early childhood. People with different attachment styles literally process money differently at the neurological level. Some people's brains treat money as a source of security and connection, while others treat it as a potential source of conflict or abandonment. This attachment influence on financial psychology helps explain why people can have such different comfort levels with financial vulnerability. Some people's brains are comfortable with financial uncertainty because they learned early in life that relationships can provide security even when resources are unpredictable. Other people's brains require high levels of financial security because they learned that resources are the most reliable source of safety and stability. Your brain also has this incredible ability to use money as a way of communicating things that are difficult to express directly. When someone gives you money as a gift, your brain processes it not just as a transfer of resources, but as a message about how much you matter to them. When someone spends money on you, your brain might interpret it as a sign of love or care. When someone asks you for money, your brain might process it as a request for trust or intimacy. These communicative aspects of money can create some really complex emotional dynamics. Your brain might feel conflicted about accepting financial help because it represents both support and dependence. You might feel complicated about spending money on yourself because it represents both self-care and selfishness. You might feel anxious about financial success because it represents both achievement and separation from others who have less. The fascinating thing about money's symbolic meanings is that they're often unconscious. Your brain is processing these deeper psychological associations without your awareness, which means your financial behaviors might be driven by emotional needs that you don't even recognize. You might think you're making practical financial decisions when you're actually trying to meet psychological needs for security, autonomy, or connection. Here's something beautiful. Recognizing what money represents to your brain can help you understand your financial behaviors and emotional responses in a much deeper way. Instead of judging yourself for being irrational about money, you can start to see your financial emotions as information about your deeper psychological needs. Your anxiety about spending might be telling you something important about your need for security. Your guilt about earning money might be telling you something important about your beliefs about worthiness. This understanding doesn't mean you should ignore practical financial considerations in favor of psychological ones. Instead, it means you can make financial decisions that honor both your practical needs and your emotional needs. When you understand what money means to your brain, you can start to find ways of meeting your psychological needs that don't require putting your financial security at risk. And this brings us to our final exploration: how understanding all of these psychological processes can change not just how you think about money, but how you experience your entire relationship with abundance, scarcity, and what it means to have enough. Chapter 11. The Enough Equation. You know that moment when you're looking at something you want to buy, and your brain starts running this complex calculation that has nothing to do with math? It's not just, do I have enough money for this? It's more like, do I deserve this? Will buying this make me happy? What will other people think? Am I being responsible? What if I need this money for something else later? Your brain is essentially trying to solve an equation that has no clear answer. What does it mean to have enough? What if I told you that your brain's answer to this question is one of the most important factors in determining your relationship with money, and that this answer has almost nothing to do with the act? And understanding how your brain creates this feeling can transform your entire experience of financial life. Here's something absolutely incredible. Researchers have found that people's sense of financial adequacy is more strongly correlated with their psychological relationship to money than with their actual financial resources. This means that two people with identical incomes and expenses can have completely different experiences of financial security based on how their brains process the concept of enough. Your feeling of having enough is essentially a subjective creation of your brain, not an objective reflection of your financial situation. This subjective nature of enough helps explain some of the most puzzling aspects of financial psychology. Why do some people making minimum wage feel more financially secure than others making six figures? Why do people often feel less financially satisfied after getting raises or bonuses? Why does financial anxiety seem to affect people across all income levels? The answer is that your brain's enough equation is based on factors that go far beyond your actual financial resources. Your brain calculates enough using what researchers call reference point processing. This is when your brain compares your current situation to various reference points to determine whether you have sufficient resources. But here's the fascinating part. Your brain doesn't just use one reference point. It uses multiple reference points simultaneously, and these reference points can lead to contradictory conclusions about whether you have enough. Some people notice that they can feel simultaneously grateful for what they have and anxious about not having enough, depending on which reference point their brain is using at enough, ingeniously. When you compare your financial situation to people who have less, your brain might conclude that you have plenty. When you compare your situation to people who have more, your brain might conclude that you're falling behind. When you compare your current situation to your past struggles, you might feel abundant. When you compare your current situation to your future goals, you might feel insufficient. This multi-reference point processing creates what researchers call reference point instability. Your brain's assessment of whether you have enough can fluctuate dramatically based on which comparison it's making, even when your actual financial situation remains constant. It's like your brain is running multiple enough equations simultaneously and getting different answers from each one. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this fascinating interaction between regions that process objective information and regions that process subjective meaning. Your prefrontal cortex might be able to calculate that you have sufficient resources to meet your needs, but your limbic system might still be generating anxiety based on emotional associations with scarcity or social comparison. This can create the strange experience of intellectually knowing you have enough while emotionally feeling like you don't. This cognitive emotional conflict around enough is incredibly common, and it's not a sign that there's something wrong with your thinking. It's a natural result of your brain trying to process a concept that's both practical and deeply psychological. Your brain is essentially trying to solve a question that requires both mathematical calculation and emotional wisdom, and these two types of processing don't always reach the same conclusions. Your brain's enough equation is also heavily influenced by what researchers call temporal framing. This is how your brain thinks about time when it's assessing financial adequacy. When you focus on your immediate needs, you might feel like you have plenty. When you think about long-term goals or potential emergencies, you might feel like you need more. When you think about past financial struggles, you might feel grateful for your current situation. When you imagine future financial pressures, you might feel unprepared. This temporal dimension of enough helps explain why financial planning can feel so emotionally complicated. Your brain is trying to calculate adequacy not just for your current situation, but for multiple possible future scenarios, many of which are inherently unpredictable. It's like your brain is trying to solve an equation where half the variables are unknowable, which naturally creates uncertainty and anxiety. Here's something that will blow your mind. Your brain's sense of enough is heavily influenced by what researchers call hedonic adaptation. This is your brain the tendency to return to baseline levels of satisfaction after positive changes in your circumstances. When your income increases or your financial situation improves, your brain initially feels like you have more than enough. But over time, your brain adapts to the new level of resources and resets its baseline for what feels adequate. This hedonic adaptation helps explain why financial improvements often feel less satisfying than people expect them to be. Your brain is designed to adapt to positive changes, which means that feelings of financial abundance tend to be temporary unless you're consciously working to maintain them. It's like your brain has a built-in mechanism that prevents you from feeling financially satisfied for extended periods, regardless of your actual resources. Your brain also has this incredible ability to create what psychologists call conditional enough. This is when your brain decides that you'll have enough once you reach certain financial milestones, but then moves the goalposts when you actually reach those milestones. You might think you'll feel financially secure once you have $10,000 in savings, but when you reach that goal, your brain might decide that $20,000 would really be enough. This goalpost moving can create a cycle where enough always feels just out of reach. This conditional enough pattern is often driven by your brain's tendency to focus on what's missing rather than what's present. Your brain is naturally wired to notice gaps and problems because this vigilance helped keep humans alive in dangerous environments. But in the context of modern financial life, this same vigilance can prevent you from recognizing when you actually do have enough resources to meet your needs. Some people notice that their sense of financial adequacy changes dramatically based on their emotional state or stress levels. When you're feeling generally secure and happy, the same bank account balance might feel completely adequate. When you're feeling stressed or uncertain about other areas of life, that same balance might feel insufficient. This isn't because your financial needs have changed, it's because your brain's enough equation is influenced by your overall sense of security and well-being. This emotional influence on financial adequacy helps explain why financial stress often comes in waves that don't correspond to actual changes in your financial situation. Your brain's assessment of whether you have enough is constantly being updated based on your emotional state, your recent experiences, and your current stress levels. It's like your brain is running a dynamic calculation where the formula changes based on factors that have nothing to do with money. Here's something beautiful. Understanding how your brain creates the sense of enough can help you recognize when your financial anxiety is actually about adequacy rather than scarcity. Sometimes when you feel like you don't have enough money, what you're really experiencing is uncertainty about what enough even means in your situation. Your brain is struggling not with a lack of resources, but with a lack of clear criteria for determining when you have sufficient resources. This distinction between scarcity and adequacy, uncertainty is incredibly important because they require different responses. If you're actually lacking resources, you might need to focus on earning more or spending less. But if you're struggling with adequacy, uncertainty, you might benefit more from clarifying your values, examining your reference points, and developing a more conscious relationship with your brain's enough equation. Your brain also has this amazing capacity to create what researchers call, this is when your sense of having enough is aligned with your deeper values and priorities, rather than with external comparisons or arbitrary financial targets. When your brain calculates adequacy based on whether you have sufficient resources to live according to your values, the enough equation becomes much more stable and satisfying. This values-based approach to adequacy helps explain why some people feel financially fulfilled, even with modest resources, while others feel financially anxious despite significant wealth. Your brain's sense of enough becomes more reliable when it's based on your own authentic priorities rather than on social expectations or arbitrary numerical targets. It's like your brain can create a more accurate and stable enough equation when it has clear, personally meaningful criteria to work with. The fascinating thing about the enough equation is that it's ultimately under more conscious control than most other aspects of financial psychology. While you can't easily change your brain's automatic responses to scarcity or social comparison, you can influence how your brain calculates adequacy by becoming more conscious about your reference points, your values, and your definitions of financial success. This doesn't mean you can simply decide to feel like you have enough and make it so, but it does mean that you can gradually influence your brain's adequacy calculations by paying attention to what factors you're using to determine whether you have sufficient resources, and by consciously choosing reference points and criteria that align with your actual needs and values, rather than with arbitrary social standards. And this brings us to the profound realization that so much of our financial stress comes not from actual scarcity, but from the incredible complexity of trying to navigate an economic world that our brains weren't designed to understand, using psychological systems that evolved for completely different circumstances. Yes. Chapter 12. The Modern Money Paradox. Picture this scenario. You're sitting in a coffee shop, and you overhear someone talking about how everything is so expensive these days. At the next table, someone else is discussing their financial stress, even though they have a good job and no major financial crises. Across the room, someone is scrolling through their phone, looking slightly anxious as they check financial news. And somewhere in this same coffee shop, you're thinking about your own financial situation, probably feeling some mixture of gratitude and concern, satisfaction and anxiety, abundance and scarcity, all at the same time. What if I told you that this scene captures one of the most fascinating paradoxes of our time, that we're living in an era of unprecedented wealth and opportunity, while simultaneously experiencing unprecedented levels of financial anxiety and stress? Your brain is trying to navigate an economic reality that's more complex and abundant than anything humans have ever experienced. But it's using psychological systems that evolved to help our ancestors survive in conditions of genuine scarcity and immediate physical threat. Here's something absolutely mind-blowing. Economists and psychologists have discovered that financial anxiety and actual financial hardship don't correlate as closely as you might expect. People across all income levels report significant financial stress, and some of the highest levels of financial anxiety are found in populations that are objectively financially secure. Your brain is essentially generating financial stress in response to complexity and uncertainty, rather than just in response to actual resource scarcity. This disconnect between objective financial reality and subjective financial experience helps explain why so many people feel like everything is expensive, even when historical data shows that many goods and services are actually more affordable than they've ever been. Your brain isn't processing historical comparisons, it's processing immediate emotional responses to complex information in an overwhelming economic environment. Your brain evolved to make resource decisions in small groups with simple trade relationships and limited options. Now it's trying to navigate a global economy with millions of products, countless financial instruments, constant market fluctuations, and an endless stream of information about economic trends and opportunities. It's like your brain is trying to use Stone Age software to run a space age operating system, and the incompatibility is creating constant stress. Some people notice that they feel more financially anxious now than their parents did, even though they objectively have more financial opportunities and security than previous generations. This isn't because your generation is less capable with money. It's because your brain is processing a fundamentally different and more complex economic environment than any previous generation has ever faced. This generational difference in financial experience is partly due to what researchers call choice overload. When your brain has too many financial options to process, it can become paralyzed or anxious rather than empowered. Having more choices should theoretically make you better off, but your brain's decision-making systems can become overwhelmed when there are too many variables to consider. It's like having so many options that choosing becomes more stressful than having limited options. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this constant tension between systems that evolved for immediate survival and systems that are trying to plan for complex long-term financial goals. Your amygdala is scanning for immediate threats, while your prefrontal cortex is trying to calculate retirement savings. Your limbic system is responding to social status cues, while your rational brain is trying to make objective financial decisions. These systems are often working at cross purposes, creating internal conflict about financial priorities. This evolutionary mismatch helps explain why financial decisions can feel so emotionally charged and cognitively demanding. Your brain is essentially running multiple incompatible programs simultaneously, ancient survival software and modern planning software. And the conflicts between these programs create stress and uncertainty about financial choices. Your brain also has to process financial information at a scale and speed that's completely unprecedented in human history. You might encounter more financial information in a single day than your ancestors encountered in months or years. Your brain is trying to evaluate investment options, compare prices, assess economic risks, and make spending decisions while simultaneously processing news about global markets, social media posts about other people's financial lives, and advertisements for thousands of products and services. This information overload creates what researchers call cognitive load cascades. When your brain is overwhelmed with financial information, it starts making shortcuts and simplifications that can lead to both anxiety and poor decision-making. Your brain might start avoiding financial decisions altogether, or it might start making impulsive choices. Here's something that will blow your mind. Many of the financial behaviors that seem irrational or self-destructive are actually your brain's attempts to cope with an environment that's too complex for your psychological systems to handle effectively. Impulse spending, financial avoidance, analysis paralysis, and even financial anxiety itself can all be understood as your brain's ways of trying to manage cognitive and emotional overload. This doesn't mean these behaviors are optimal or that you're powerless to change them, but it does mean that approaching financial stress with self-compassion and understanding is often more effective than approaching it with self-criticism and willpower. Your brain is doing its best to navigate an environment that it wasn't designed for, and recognizing this can help you work with your psychological systems rather than against them. The modern money paradox also includes what researchers call abundance anxiety. This is when having more financial options and opportunities actually creates more stress rather than more satisfaction. Your brain might feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of making optimal financial choices, or guilty about having financial privileges that others don't have, or anxious about losing financial security that you've worked hard to achieve. This abundance anxiety helps explain why financial success doesn't always lead to financial peace of mind. Your brain might feel more pressure when you have more to lose, or more responsibility when you have more options, or more comparison pressure when you're financially successful. The same brain that craved financial security when you had less might feel burdened by financial responsibility when you have more. Your brain also has to navigate what economists call the paradox of choice in financial contexts. Having more financial products, investment options, and earning opportunities should theoretically make you better off, but it can also make decision-making more difficult and stressful. Your brain might spend more energy trying to optimize financial choices than it gains from having those choices available. This choice paradox is amplified by your brain's tendency toward maximizing rather than satisficing when it comes to financial decisions. Instead of looking for financial choices that are good enough to meet your needs, your brain might feel compelled to find the optimal choice among dozens or hundreds of options. This maximizing tendency can turn every financial decision into an exhausting optimization problem. Here's something beautiful. Recognizing the modern money paradox can help you develop more realistic expectations for your financial experience. Instead of expecting that financial experience, you can understand that some level of financial stress, you can understand that some level of financial complexity and uncertainty is simply a feature of modern economic life. This doesn't mean accepting unnecessary financial stress, but it does mean recognizing that your brain is navigating unprecedented challenges. This understanding can also help you make more conscious choices about how much financial complexity you want to take on. Just because you have access to hundreds of investment options doesn't mean you need to use all of them. Just because you can optimize every financial decision doesn't mean you should spend the mental energy to do so. Your brain might be happier with simpler financial systems, even if they're not theoretically optimal. And this leads us to perhaps the most practical insight of all, that working with your brain's natural tendencies, rather than against them, might be the key to finding peace in our complex financial world. You know that feeling when you finally organize that messy drawer or clear off your cluttered desk, and suddenly you can think, what if I told you that your brain has a similar response to bringing clarity and simplicity to your financial life, not through complex optimization strategies, but through understanding and working with your brain's natural tendencies? Here's something absolutely fascinating. Researchers have discovered that people who have the most sustainable and satisfying relationships with money aren't necessarily the ones who have the most sophisticated financial strategies. They're the ones who have found ways to align their financial practices with their brain's natural processing patterns. Instead of fighting against their psychological tendencies, they've learned to create financial systems that work with their mental architecture. This alignment between financial practices and psychological tendencies creates what researchers call cognitive ease around money. When your financial systems match how your brain naturally processes information, financial management becomes less effortful and less stressful. It's like finding the right gear while driving. Everything suddenly feels smoother and more efficient, not because you're working harder, but because you're working in harmony with the system. Some people notice that they feel calmer about money when they simplify their financial lives, even when the simplified version isn't theoretically optimal. Your brain often prefers clarity and predictability over complexity and optimization. A simple financial system that you understand and can manage without stress might serve you better than a complex system that creates anxiety, even if the complex system could theoretically produce better returns. This preference for simplicity isn't a character flaw or a sign of financial immaturity. It's your brain prioritizing sustainability and emotional well-being over theoretical optimization. Your brain is essentially recognizing that the stress and cognitive load of managing complex financial systems might outweigh the potential benefits of those systems. It's choosing psychological health over financial perfectionism. Your brain also benefits enormously from what researchers call financial routines. These are automatic patterns of financial behavior that reduce the cognitive load of making repeated decisions. When you create routines around saving, spending, and financial planning, your brain doesn't have to use precious mental energy making the same decisions over and over again. It's like creating financial habits that free up mental resources. These financial routines are particularly powerful because they work with your brain's natural tendency toward automaticity. Your brain loves to create efficient patterns that don't require conscious decision-making. When you establish financial routines that align with your values and goals, your brain can implement them automatically, reducing financial stress and decision fatigue. Meanwhile, in your brain, there's this beautiful process that happens when you create what psychologists call values-based financial boundaries. These are clear guidelines about financial decisions that are based on your deeper priorities rather than on arbitrary rules or social expectations. When your brain has clear, personally meaningful criteria for making financial choices, decision-making becomes much easier and more satisfying. These values-based boundaries help your brain distinguish between financial decisions that deserve careful consideration and financial decisions that can be made quickly based on established principles. It's like having a personal financial constitution that guides your choices without requiring constant deliberation. Your brain can make faster, more confident decisions because it has clear criteria to work with. Your brain also experiences significant relief when you create what researchers call financial acceptance. This is when you recognize and accept the limitations and uncertainties that are inherent in financial life, rather than trying to control or optimize everything. Financial acceptance doesn't mean being passive about your finances. It means recognizing which aspects of your financial life you can influence and which aspects you need to accept. This financial acceptance can be particularly liberating for brains that tend toward perfectionism or control. When you accept that you can't predict or control all financial outcomes, your brain can redirect its energy toward the aspects of financial life that you can actually influence. It's like your brain stops wasting energy on unsolvable problems and focuses on actionable opportunities. Here's something that might surprise you. Your brain often finds more financial peace through gratitude practices than through optimization strategies. When you regularly notice and appreciate what you already have, your brain's reference points shift in ways that naturally increase your sense of financial adequacy. Gratitude essentially updates your brain's enough equation by highlighting abundance that might otherwise go unnoticed. This gratitude effect isn't just about positive thinking. It's about training your brain to notice different aspects of your financial reality. Your brain has a natural tendency to focus on problems and gaps, but gratitude practices can help balance this negativity bias by directing attention toward resources and achievements that are actually present in your life. Your brain also benefits from what researchers call financial mindfulness. This is when you bring conscious awareness to your financial thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without judgment. Financial mindfulness helps you notice when your brain is running automatic patterns that don't serve you, and it creates space between financial triggers and your responses to them. This mindful awareness can help you recognize when financial stress is being generated by psychological factors rather than by actual financial problems. You might notice when you're comparing your situation to others, or when you're catastrophizing about unlikely future scenarios, or when you're applying outdated financial fears to current circumstances that are actually secure. The fascinating thing about financial mindfulness is that it often reduces financial stress without requiring any changes to your actual financial situation. Simply becoming aware of how your brain processes financial information can shift your relationship. It's like the difference between being lost in a confusing house and recognizing that you're in a fun house with optical illusions. The external situation hasn't changed, but your experience of it transforms completely. Your brain also finds significant peace in what psychologists call financial self-compassion. This is when you treat yourself with kindness and understanding around financial mistakes, struggles, and imperfections, rather than with criticism and judgment. Financial self-compassion recognizes that everyone makes financial mistakes and that financial learning is a lifelong process. This self-compassion is particularly important because financial shame and self-criticism often create the very stress and poor decision-making that they're trying to prevent. When your brain is constantly generating self-criticism about financial choices, it's using mental energy that could be directed toward actually improving your financial situation. Self-compassion frees up this energy for more constructive purposes. Here's something beautiful. All of these approaches to financial peace have something in common. They work with your brain's natural tendencies rather than against them. They recognize that your brain is doing its best to navigate an incredibly complex environment, and they create conditions that support your brain's natural wisdom rather than overwhelming its processing capacity. This collaborative approach to financial wellness represents a fundamental shift from fighting against your psychological tendencies to understanding and honoring them. Instead of trying to force your brain to be more rational, more disciplined, or more optimized, you can create financial practices that feel natural and sustainable because they align with how your brain actually works. And as we come to the end of our journey together through the fascinating landscape of money and mind, we arrive at perhaps the most important discovery of all: that financial peace isn't about having perfect finances. It's about having a peaceful relationship with the beautiful complexity of your own financial psychology. As we reach the end of tonight's exploration, take a moment to notice what you're feeling right now. Has anything shifted in how you think about that grocery store moment of sticker shock, or that late-night financial worry, or that complex feeling you get when thinking about money? Tonight we've discovered that your brain treats financial uncertainty as a survival threat, that money activates the same neural pathways as physical pain, and that your sense of having enough is more about psychology than mathematics. We've seen how your ancient brain tries to navigate a modern economy it was never designed for, creating stress responses that often have more to do with information overload than actual scarcity. Perhaps most importantly, we've learned that financial anxiety isn't a character flaw. It's your remarkably sophisticated brain working overtime to protect you in an environment that's unprecedented in human history. Every time you feel that familiar knot of money worry, you're experiencing millions of years of evolution trying to keep you safe in a world of credit scores and compound interest. So, as you settle into sleep tonight, we wonder, when you next feel that flutter of financial anxiety, will you recognize it as your brain's ancient alarm system responding to modern complexity? Will you notice when your stress is about actual scarcity versus perceived scarcity? And might you find some gentleness for yourself, knowing that your brain is simply doing its very best to navigate waters no human brain has ever sailed before? Sweet dreams, fellow wanderers. May your rest be peaceful, and may you wake with a little more understanding of the beautiful, complex creature that is your money processing mind.